Very excited to talk with you about Saw 10 or X, I should say. I saw it over the weekend and was just so thrilled by it. It's probably
Amazing.
tied for my second favorite with Saw 2. So
Wow. That's
congrats.
high praise.
You guys did a great job with it. It felt like the original, but also brought so much heart to it. I loved it. How did you get involved with becoming the cinematographer for this one?
Yeah, this actually came my representative in narrative, Alex Franklin, had worked on some of the early Saw films at Lionsgate before starting his career as an agent. And so when they were looking for a DP, he thought of me and sent them my name. I think probably because I had shot a movie in Mexico City before, and also because I had some of the music video work I had done and some of the film work I had done was kind of, I shot this movie called Cuck. That was kind of a gritty sort of a film. And then I had done a horror film for Shudder called Spoonful of Sugar. So, which was not really a Saw, like that doesn't really lead you to think, oh, this person could do a Saw. So yeah, so I had got involved. Mostly he called me one day and was like, I have something I think you'd be interested in. It's the latest Saw film. And then I interviewed with Kevin Gruer that evening. So I didn't really have a lot of time to process it. And we chatted probably for an hour and a half. And then I gave him the names of some directors I had worked with before. And yeah. And then I was hired very shortly thereafter, maybe a couple of days. So it was pretty whirlwind, I would say.
Were you a big fan of the franchise you know, prior to that process?
I would say that when I was in high school, I grew up in like a very fundamentalist, conservative, religious house. So I didn't go to the movie theaters till I was in college. And like, it was very much something where I had to fight to watch things that weren't censored. But when Saw came out, I was just so enamored with the possibility of watching it. It sounded intense and gruesome and scary. And I think, there's something macabre in the Bible's a very macabre book and it's got a lot of violence in it. So I think there was something about it that compelled me. And then when I saw the first film, I was just really taken by it. I rented it from Blockbuster. My younger brother and I watched it together. And then I ended up watching I think I watched Saw 2 and Saw 3 kind of in that same era. And then I sort of like, I think I went to college and I started watching, stuff like No Country for Old Men and There'll Be Blood and all this, kind of went on a different path. But so I would say that there was a part of me that was like really connected to those movies and what they meant in my life in that time. So to be able to do something like this felt I mean, I worked at this religious organization called the Creation Museum when I was in high school and college. My life has gone in a different direction, as you can see. But even back as far as then, I would do like the jigsaw voice, and be wandering around the halls of this place so I think, yeah, there's a real love for it and what it means in culture and in cinema. And then, I'm a massive fan of Seven, and I've always sort of said Saw feels like Seven by way of a new metal music video. So it's sort of like, it's bold and it's loud and it's sort of there's exclamation points everywhere. And yeah, so I did have a familiarity, but I went back and rewatched a lot of them. Actually, I only watched 1, 2, 3, and 6 because Kevin was like, focus on these. These are the ones that are critical. And so I didn't watch any of the others in preparation, but I've seen them all since.
That's a really interesting group of movies he gave you for homework, essentially,
Yeah.
and skipping over, especially since he directed quite a few of the other ones,
Yeah.
edited the
Yeah.
majority of them.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what that process was like, bringing your own vision for what you wanted the movie to look like while also working with someone who has, been across this whole franchise.
Yeah. I mean, Kevin is absolutely a gem of a person. Kevin's really brilliant. He's methodical. He's fastidious. He's very funny. He's easy to work for, and easy to collaborate with. I think he really gets, he gets the best out of his collaborators because he gives them a lot of trust, but he also tries to hire well. And I think Kevin navigates, you know, Kevin understands the franchise, and he also understands the people behind the franchise really well. And I think ultimately that those two pieces are essential in making a Saw film and making something that can both speak to what the fans are interested, can speak to what the business, financiers need and want. And then also ultimately our goal is always like, how do we make something that's really great and something that's really entertaining? So I think for Kevin, I felt very much in safe hands because he knows, like, the way he edits is he goes through every single piece of footage and subclips everything that's potentially usable and then whittles away and then whittles away and then whittles away. And that's his process on on every movie he cuts. But I think that could also describe how he works as a director, which is he's just extremely, he tested every trap 3 to 4 times. He knew that little pieces on the day, because you only get like a day and a half. You can't rent the crane every day. You can't get the prosthetics cost tens of thousands of dollars to produce, and you can't shoot them again and again and again. So you really have to have a very thorough plan. Even just your order of events, working with, okay, we're going to shoot this piece and then we're going to apply this makeup, or this prosthetic, and then we're going to shoot this piece while that's being applied, just so you'd have as minimal downtime as possible, as few problems as possible. And you still have challenges that arise, but yeah, so Kevin was just fantastic. He understands, if in order for the traps to work, you have to have a very linear, upfront sort of explanation via Jigsaw. And then also the cutting, it's very straightforward. You want the audience to understand the stakes so that they're able to invest in it and place themselves there. It's really not something, and it's those sort of things, but he also knows the characters, so yeah, just an encyclopedia of knowledge, really. And also like a genuine, cinephile, and he's very much someone who, it's like our conversations could dance from, Jodorowsky to, I should have another movie to say, but it's like for everything from that to, something silly. And I think Kevin just really has a great, part of what's so great about him is he does have a unique perspective and really see the world and a funny, we're always looking at what's funny and absurd, both in the process of making it and also in the film. And so I think we both understand that the movie is, it comes from Giallo roots. There's a bit of an expressionism and some, camp and humor. And so and also it's funny to think about, it's like, how does Jigsaw operate Billy? And it's 2005. Is this remote controlled? Is he just standing there with fishing line? What's going, you know what I mean? So we have a good time. And I think for me, I knew when I was hired, it's I knew that the franchise had sort of deviated from what made the early films so successful. They tried other things. They tried other visual styles. They'd shot anamorphic. They'd done other things like that. And so Kevin and I talked about it, and, we really wanted to feel like it fit between 1 and 2. And so a lot of what I was trying to do was take the palettes of 1 and 2, and find a way to bring them into this film, but then give them their own arc. And so for me, a lot of what that looked like was, we lit a lot with practicals, and we lit a lot with, there's basically that warehouse is completely decked out with probably 50 to 100 practical lights that have all been placed within housing. And so every light you see is a film light, but that's an LED that's controllable from a digital console. But everything has been placed inside of, I had them set dress it within the space. So everywhere you look, the camera can look anywhere, and it's all safe. It's all camera safe. And then, for stuff like where we first reveal Billy and we first reveal Amanda, it's I know these are big hero moments in a story. So we're focusing on kind of like, this is my chance to like Billy and be like, aha, John's very theatrical. He's designed these traps to specifically speak to certain moral issues of each character. So I think there's a degree of flexibility with that. And, I sort of took this approach of like, John has all these traps on circuit timers. So when they power up, lights associated with them power up. And when the trap ends, the lights associated with them shut off. And that kind of gave us the ability to change the lighting without it being like completely like a DJ, John being a DJ of the lights. So part of it for me was I wanted to take that like ochre, jaundicey yellow. I wanted to take that sort of poisonous, arsenical green of the early films and then some of the fluorescent blues. But I wanted to bring them into our film in a way that didn't feel so monochromatic. And I wanted the traps, I have the same challenge that the first Saw film has, which, and I guess technically the second, but it's predominantly one space. How do you keep it visually interesting the entire time? And then also, how do you, craft something that makes you feel like you need a tetanus shot? So that was kind of the idea. And then eventually you get to the bloodboarding trap, and it's like, how do you, for me, it was like, I want to cycle back to what's going to make the blood read the best. Well, blue would. And then also like the red uplight was just like coming out of the trap was just like, let's go giallo, and let's just be very like, let's just bring these big color strokes into the movie. So, and then when the emergency lights go off and we sort of have this big reveal towards the end, it's just like, I really wanted the whole room to be bathed in red. And so I remember when I asked the production designer for 50 emergency like spinners, and he's like, what the fuck? Like 50? And I'm like, yeah, I need like one in every corner, like fill all the control room. And part of the challenge is like, you're shooting the control room before you shoot the game space, because it just doesn't make sense to move all your crew up and then down and then up and then down. It's just, you eat time that way. So we did majority of the control room was shot, and then we shot out most of the game room. And so we had to really know, like I had a document that I built myself that was like, basically I had a written document and a visual document because my crew was also all Mexican, and their Spanish and my English I don't speak Spanish, and most of them didn't speak English. So there was a bit of translation, just like playing with each other. But yeah, I guess the goal was to try and take what the early films did really well. We wanted, we shot at a high ASA, we had a grain in post. I think we could have gone further with it now that I've seen it twice in theaters, but at the same time, like digital cinema with like fake, film grain on it is just, I really wanted us to do a film out. I wanted us to print to 35 or something so we could have more texture. It reads like, I saw it in the theater. I'm like, we could have pushed it harder, but we shot with vintage, they're modern glass, but they have like a vintage quality. And then we use filtration, this thing called a pearlescent one. And that's kind of what gives the film a little bit of that bloominess and that sort of like texture. But I think because the contrast is so steep in the movie, that sort of like softness and elegance, that doesn't end up feeling too like Barbara Walters or like anything like that. It does, it's still gritty and scuzzy. It's just got like this sort of something to take the digital, like for me, Spiral and Jigsaw are too clean. They're too modern for what we wanted. So it was, how do we photographically bring in this like dirtiness, this grittiness, this grime? And like, this is something that I specifically feel, but it's like, I'm very interested in photographing beauty and brutality. And I sort of love like playing with both of those and making one, sort of fit into the other. And and in this case, I think we also had the advantage of, this is a very John Kramer story, and Saw has never gone there. And so we were able to do like, more of a drama or character study to open the film, and almost a more traditional movie in a way. And then the movie can kind of move from like something that feels a little more Rembrandt and beautiful into then these like harsh downlights and doing stuff that like, honestly, I lost sleep over because I was like, this is so grotesque. Even just like lighting, I wouldn't normally put like an older woman in hard downlight. That's just not how you light women. But for this, it was like, well, they're sweaty and bloody, and it's just it actually felt wrong to make it feel too cosmetic or glamorous. So it was also like, no, like this is actually the right choice for these sequences.
Well, I think everything that you took in mind came across very well on screen. I thought this was definitely one of the best looking movies, while still feeling true to what James did in the original. One of the things that I've always been curious about, though, when it comes to shooting a Saw movie, is do you get dizzy when you have to do the shots of circling the person in the trap? Obviously it's sped up in editing, but I mean, what is that process like for you in that moment, filming as you're going around the victim multiple
Yeah.
times?
Yeah, we really, so one of the things we were like, look, this is such a Saw thing. Like, let's not, like, they kind of got away from doing circular dolly track and some of those, like, for lack of a better word, like the stutter frame kind of feeling, or those like flash frames. And we were like, no, let's go back to it. Like, let's bring it back. Like, it's a great way to build intensity. It's a great way to make it feel visually kinetic. And so what we actually did is we shoot a lot of those like stutter frames or whatever are shot, it's shot under cranked. So we shoot it at 6 frames a second. Then we lengthen the shutter speed. So we shoot the shutter speed's like 270-degree shutter, or like, I don't know what that do with the math. And then it basically gives it like this really dreamy effect. And then when you play it back at 24, it's really sped up. So it does give it this, and yeah, it's dizzying. I mean, like I was operating on the eyeball trap when we were doing all those, and we built, because of the way our space was, we actually built the eyeball trap location is actually underneath the control room. And we just shot, because we have to cheat and use different spaces to do different things. And so we built it in there. And it was actually like very tough because we couldn't get, like, because of where the pillars were, we couldn't actually get a full circle dolly track. So we ended up like laying track mat basically, and then doing it on that. And so my dolly grip was having to do that. But it is like, yeah, it's dizzying, but also like, it's so fun, it's like really fun. And it's just like fun to, like, I love like creating like visually compelling, I love doing stuff. It's like the twist with use like a lambda head to do this like twist when the finger breaks. And it's sort of like, how do you create these like big visual moments? And so that was, yeah, it's really fun. And then even for some of them, like I ended up getting COVID at some point while we were shooting. And so when I came back from that, I was like, I can't operate a camera anymore. My energy was so tanked. And so we hired operators, but what it meant was like, even when we were shooting Mateo's brain surgery trap, it's like, I had already set the lighting and I saw what it looked like. And, Kevin was working with our operators to like set frames and get the piece of coverage we need, because we shot most of that in one day. And so I just like, I have like a little Blackmagic 6K camera, and I like grabbed that and, set it to 6 frames a second. And I was doing like lens whacking, where you disconnect the lens from the sensor plane and you're just kind of playing, which it's a way to simulate getting those like film rollouts that they got in the early days of like shooting film, and it'd roll out and then they would use the rollout in the film. And so it's like playing with light leaks and stuff like that. So all the brain trap, like stutter frame stuff was shot on my Blackmagic, just with me like, walking around while they're shooting other pieces, and I'm doing it because we just have to move like lightning. Yeah, so it's a lot of fun. I don't really get grossed out by it while we're making it, because it's just so, it's not, if there's a C stand holding an arm up and you're cutting the arm, and it's like what's in the frame is so like upsetting. So sometimes there'd be times where I would go and sit on monitor just offset, and I would be like, so I could get a proper look at everything we're doing. And then I would be more icked out by that than being on set, where you're just like, actually, like there's a person with a pump, like, you know what I mean? It's like all very, it's very controlled, and when you are destroying these, I don't know how much the prosthetics cost, but tens of thousands of dollars. You're like, I know why they cost that, because they're so good. And then B, you're like, yeah, we can't fuck this up, I mean,
No, I hear you. I mean, and yeah, I can appreciate the disassociation you have of, oh, I see the stunt prosthetic. Oh God, now it's real when watching it. So it's definitely a trip with these movies. But I'm glad in particular though that you brought back You guys brought back the spinning because
Yeah,
yes, that's something that went away, I felt, and it was something I always loved that James did that gave that like you say, that tension kinetic energy to the original
yeah.
movie.
And it
Uh
feels signature Saw. Like it just feels signature Saw. And it's like we don't need to hide that. Like it doesn't make us not creative to like take the sort of things that make Saw Saw and then do it our own way.
I completely agree. I love how intimate a lot of the shots are in this movie, especially with John and Amanda. There are a lot more close-ups than we typically get in a Saw movie, and I'm curious if that was your idea or if that was Kevin's idea, and how you went about putting those together.
Yeah, it does have a lot of intimacy in this in like seeing it in on the big screen even like I really felt that. I think in a lot of ways, like Kevin, when we first started talking about it, he was like, Saw is like, in a lot of ways, Saw is a story told in close up. It's insert shots of bone marrow. It's there's 4,000 cuts in that movie. And like many Saw films, just they cut and they cut and they cut. And we even talked about shooting things more center punch, similar to like Mad Max, where it's, if you know it's going to cut, you want to know the audience where their eyes are going to go. So I even shot the movie in we captured a 4:3 sensor plane. We framed for 1.85, but we knew we had the extra bits. And that was if Kevin needs to blow it up and change the framing, like we need that and we want that available to us. And so I think mostly as we were talking, like because Kevin is an editor and he thinks like an editor, part of it comes down to two things. One is we're shooting two cameras for everything. So how do you sneak in two cameras? And you can either shoot cross coverage or you can shoot one character and you shoot wide and tight. And so for us, we would do a mixture of that. I really lit this in a pretty 360 way. So we were actually shooting a lot of cross coverage. We were doing multiple cameras, shooting different pieces in different places. We weren't just doing the traditional, like, wide and tight on one side and then turn around and do wide and tight. So I think that like naturally lends because we could only share one lens set. It Saw, but we could still like we had two cameras, but we can only afford one lens set, and like the dream sequence inside or the like anesthesia sequence inside of the operating theater, I could only afford one tilt shift lens. So I used that Vaseline and just like did a swirl around the other lens and it cuts like you don't feel the differences, but it is different. So our lens, that also meant that our lens choices, it's easier to get two cameras in if you use longer lenses. So that's just like a practical thing that was happening. From a creative perspective, Kevin and I sat and shot listed the film together. And then Kevin, most nights before we were shooting, he would revise it, or he would, even we had a month down between we shot all the non-prosthetic stuff, then we had a month off, and then we shot the other, all the prosthetics because the timing didn't work out for when the prosthetics were supposed to be finished. And through no fault of the prosthetics company, we switched companies, and it became a decision of like we either push the entire movie or we shoot out what we have already built and figured out, and then we come back and we do. So in general, it meant we shot most of the first half of the movie, and then we shot most of the second, just because of the nature of those scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And so what that gave us though was an extra month to really sit and think about what those scenes looked and felt like, specifically the traps. And so Kevin had, I would say most days I came on set, we would have like 6 to 7 pages worth of coverage listed. And I'm like, fuck, we have to move like lightning. And, I think, yeah, and I stayed awake a lot thinking about like how to light the actors and actresses because I'm like, this is just not the most cosmetic. Yeah, but I think that ultimately was the right choice for what the film was, I would say.
Yeah, it was really just whose idea was it?
Yeah, I would say, yeah. So ultimately, I would say Kevin like knows that the movie needs close-ups, and
Mm-hmm.
that was a constant sort of decision. And then as we're actually photographing it is actually about what is this scene and what does this scene need. So I do think you end up with a lot, you're here like eyes to lips on John in some of these. And there's some really intimate scenes. I mean, we've never seen Amanda and John have this level of intimacy before. And also you're telling the story of a dying man, who's experiencing extreme betrayal and grief. And so it felt like, being in his eyes and feeling that was the heartbeat of the movie. And it's so there's two perspectives in this movie that we take. More than that, maybe, but in general, it's, we're shooting scenes from John's POV, or we're shooting them from the victim's point of view because we want to place the audience into the trap itself. And I think because it's Saw, we have a lot of stylistic license, and we take it. And it's like, how do we are interested in doing visually engaging material. We also understand, like the end of the second act, it's like there's a big techno crane shot where you see John and Amanda coming out, and then it whips around and does this like push in, speed ramped thing and lands on Cecilia. It's like, we're going to take those moments, but then we also know we're going to shoot a lot of these pieces, in a very like handheld kind of a way. So yeah, all credit to Kevin for like, Kevin's very collaborative, and I very much felt I was able to put my touch on things, and it has my fingerprints all over it. But Kevin is, he's a master of like knowing what this movie needs and needed to be. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you had such a rich relationship with him. It like you keep saying, and like I've kept saying, it did create some really memorable visuals for this franchise. So going to my final question then, and it's a bit of a spoiler one, so I'll have a warning in the article. But you have the first post-credit scene of the entire franchise, and it's got the return of Hoffman, a character who is both a fan favorite and divisive at the same time. And so I know that Kevin recently talked about it and said that it was the most fan servicey thing you guys kind of did. But what was it like for you, learning that this character was going to return, especially since like we were talking about earlier, you only had a certain amount of knowledge for the franchise, and I think fell short of seeing Hoffman properly outside of when you rewatched 6. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I would say because of my entry point into the franchise, like I hadn't developed the same level of connection with him that a lot of other fans did. And so for me, what was exciting was getting to shoot in the original bathroom. We built it. It was a big conversation too, because we wanted to do that final jib shot. Like we basically did a jib on a dolly, push in 360. Like I think we had to use like I don't remember which head we had to use, like a Scorpio head or something, but it's like a complicated shot to do. And that was actually the last night of our first block of shooting. And it's really scary and challenging because of the amount of material that, once again, that we have to shoot in that amount of time. And obviously you want to sell the opening, those are the original like lights that flick on. Those are the original lights from Saw 1. Like like they're and they only did one take of that. Kevin was like, I looked and looked and looked, but that's it. So it actually gets reused in the movies and stuff like that. But Kevin we thought about shooting it ourselves, but they're like, it's more fun if we use the original shot of the lights turning on and then we cut into the scene and it cuts together. It was exciting. We did a variety of like reveals with how we showed Hoffman, but I loved how Kevin ended up cutting it. And I think it was just exciting to do. For me, that scene was exciting, but like in terms of bringing Hoffman back and like, shooting and like knowing that we were going to be able to at least like give fans some degree of like connecting with Hoffman or seeing him again. But mainly for me, I was focused on how do I make this feel like the first Saw movie and connect specifically with that scene. And then in addition to that, most of my energy was spent figuring out, I more pushed for, there was always going to be, we didn't have the money to do a full trap for the end. But at the same time, I'm like, you can't end this movie and just have it be like John saying, I'd like to play a game, and it cuts to black. I'm like, you got to like show. So I was like very big in push. Like, Kevin was on board and it was something we talked about, but I was very much like, no, we should end with like a big like trap shot and like a big spiral, like something that's got like a real is a real like button for the movie, because you should give fans that. And I mean, I was trying to get us to have like blood, like, start seeing blood like spilling out, just because I wanted to give like that final touch of like blast of blood and violence. But I really love what it ended up becoming. And I really think we had 3 takes to get that shot, and we didn't get it till the third. And it was because it's very technical, because you have to basically, you're starting with a certain frame and then you're coming into this thing, and you want the spin and the center mark to hit the trap. And so we had to actually it was just that was one of the only traps we hadn't tested as well, because it was just a box that, where the knives start clicking. But what we hadn't tested was like all the extraneous pieces around that. So it took a little bit of figuring. And I thought the producers might pull the plug and tell us, look, we're just ending the movie with, I'd like to play a game, but we got the fucking shot. So yeah, I was a little nervous.
And it looks great. I loved the 360 thing. That felt so much like a great style choice on how to end it. And I'm glad it didn't just end on let's play a game, because yeah, it's now far more memorable.
Kevin like pushed and pushed, I would say too. Like, yeah.
Well, I'm glad you both pushed for that. And again, I know I've said it a lot in this interview, but you guys did such a great job on this movie. And I know it's already out, so my word can only go so far, but I'm going to keep spreading the word about this movie. It's just such a great ride. And hopefully if there's a Saw 11, you'll be back for it, because you clearly have got a great eye for this franchise.
Amazing. I really appreciate it. And it's been so fun to be able to share with people. And, it's just, I went to Beyond Fest this weekend with some friends, and like, it's just fun to like have random strangers start talking about Saw. And yeah, it's just been really what a ride. But I'm glad so many people seem to just really enjoy it.